Great. All right. Looks like we're live on the Zoom side here. So let's get started. Thank you everyone for joining another episode of the OpenJS Foundation's Cross-Project Council meeting. Today is it really November 26th? Holy cow. Yeah, the end of November. Welcome. So let's see, before we dive into things, before we dive into the agenda, do we have any announcements to share?
I just have one really important one, which is, Interactive is just around the corner, and along with that is, of course, Collab Summit, and we've got a really nice program that's coming together, so we really would love for you to register so we can get a head count in for meals and such for Collab Summit. So please register at your earliest convenience for Collab Summit, and I'll try and rustle up the link to that in a minute and get that in the chat and Slack and stuff. Is that a separate registration and for the conference? I guess it would be. Yeah, it is. I think it would be great in moving forward to be able to just do that as one registration, but it is separate. Yeah. Okay, I just couldn't remember.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Jory. Anything else, folks? If not, I will jump in to the agenda items. The first one is issue number 411, and this is kicking off an OpenJS Foundation project landscape. Brian, you opened this up 4 days ago. You wanna give us some context?
Yeah. So just like right on the tail of KubeCon, Dan Kahn had reached out and asked if he could set up a project landscape, or he offered to set up a project landscape for OpenJS Foundation. And this is something that has been done for a number of our other projects. And it generally tends to be a nice way to visualize how different organizations are involved, particularly when there are a lot of different projects involved under an umbrella. And it's similar for CNCF, but also for us, where we have quite a few projects and quite a few different organizations involved in them, and quite a few dependencies and quite a few interconnections. And this is just we found it to be a pretty good way to be able to visualize that, which, for us who are involved in it every day on the day-to-day, maybe we don't need it as much, but for somebody who's coming to it on the first time, it can be helpful. It can make it a little easier to understand the contours of the community. And generally, the way that this works, just to give a description on the software, it was developed by CNCF. And essentially, there's a Git repository that holds all the config files. And Dan was offering to do the initial configuration on it. And then at that point, editing it or adding to it or changing it is all just basically done by pull requests. So organization X comes up and says, hey, I'm involved in these particular projects, or I'm consuming these particular projects. They submit a pull request that adds themselves to the landscape, and then it gets automatically built and deployed.
So just for context, I did raise some things on this. One thing specifically was the accessibility issues. There is like 784 at the maximum cap, and similar issues are flagged by 2 other tools. So this is Accessibility Insights, WebHint, and then Lighthouse as well tagged similar things. That does seem to have had an issue created for it. Additionally, though, I do think that it's definitely worth, the projects themselves assessing the, I guess, necessity for this, or the utility of this to their success. And I do also think that, on thinking about this a little bit more, it is, the JavaScript ecosystem is fundamentally different than CNCF or like the cloud native ecosystem and the DevOps ecosystems, primarily because we do have some level of centralization. which, you know, in CNCF and the cloud native ecosystems, there's accessibility of finding, or discoverability, I guess is a better word, of finding projects is not very high. Whereas in JavaScript, there is definitely a lot of tooling that has already been built on this. And I do think it's worth considering the impact of shipping something like this and how that'll be perceived by the broader ecosystem in general, as like a dictation of this is like what's real, or this is like this is the full landscape, when in reality it's just our projects and not the actual landscape of JavaScript.
But I think that's the same for CNCF, isn't it?
It's discoverability is a lot harder there. There are tools, but a vast majority of the tools in the cloud native ecosystem, at least that aren't first party, are within that specific org. At least I would argue the ones that are used are.
Yeah, that's interesting. You raised some good points, Tony.
So
I mean, I
on the
wonder
accessibility
about
thing, I believe
Yeah,
Dan has already, either has already pushed the fixes for the accessibility issues, or they're in the pipeline fairly shortly. So that's also in the issue in his reply. It seems like, I guess from the description, it seems like they should be reasonably addressable. Tierney, if I remember correctly, it was
Yep.
alt images weren't there, and was it contrast?
Alt
That was
images,
the other big one?
contrast, and then yeah, there was a few other like side issues.
Okay, they seem reasonably addressable though.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
the alt images specifically are like the vast majority.
Yeah, okay.
So I'm curious how Dan's tool, and I'm sorry for not like going and exploring it over in the other org before, how does it compare to like Biturgia or for example, like, which is another kind of dashboardy thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. They address different issues. Biturgia is more about community metrics and analysis, whereas this is more about visualization and grouping.
Yeah, so I think the easier way to look at it is one is more of a like analysis tool and one is more of like a closer to marketing tool.
So would this be something that, like, you know, anybody could navigate to and sort of explore via some kind of like a force directed graph thing, sort of like network explorer tool? Is that kind of what it is?
So if you go to l.cncf.io or landscape.cncf.io, I'll drop it in the chat. Oh, actually, I see Joe already dropped it in the chat. We also have it for GraphQL, so l.graphql.org.
I think the most interesting part for me is it maybe provides a way to categorize, show the relationship or not between projects in the foundation.
Yeah, I agree with you, Michael. That's kind of where, I mean, you know, looking at this, I just was new to this community a year ago, and that was a bit of a learning curve to understand the interdependencies between the different projects that are under the foundation. At that time, it was JSF, not OpenJS, of course, but that is really one of the main uses for this, is to be able to show kind of at a glance how these things relate to each other, and then of course how organizations cross through them.
So I am generally a super fan of data visualization for a long list of reasons. My only concern with stuff like this is the maintainability of a tool like this over time. So it's wonderful that Dan is like, hey, we can spin this up for you. But my question is, in, you know, a year or two from now, is it something we're still going to be like maintaining and updating, and or is this like sort of an extra thing that we need to be mindful of taking care of in the future?
I guess one of these things that I really like about this is that it is managed entirely through a repo. And essentially, if it gets out of date, anybody can submit a pull request. So it is something, these things are always a trailing measure of what's going on in the community. But at the same time, there's no gating individual other than somebody merging in pull requests.
And this is Robin. Yeah.
No, go ahead, Robin.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, someone mentioned marketing. I think Dan unveiled this early on at some tech conferences that were just more broad on the tech front. So I think it was a really good marketing tool for him to show and demonstrate and try to create some shape and structure around his community to folks who aren't just living in it and know it intuitively. So it has been a very good, I think, marketing tool for their organization.
I would think that like it'd be interesting to see what our categories are, and even like if there's gaps that might help say, okay, well, like say if there's a security provider but we have nobody in the foundation related to security, it might give us some ideas of where to go look and to add projects to.
One of the interesting things that I've noticed, particularly with the GraphQL one, is that organizations who aren't already members in the foundation, or who aren't maybe speaking up in the meetings, will submit pull requests and add themselves and as end users. And that can also be useful as well, because it gives some idea of how broad the constituency goes. And Robin, I think I might have talked over you. Did I?
No, that's okay. No, I think that's great. I think adding other categories, adding members who are not members of OpenJS is all good.
Yeah, the adopter part, is that what you're saying? Like the GraphQL adopter, those are companies who are not part of the foundation, but are users.
Some of them may be members, some of them may not be, but at the same time, we have
right.
companies just rolling up out of the blue and saying, "Hey, we're using this," and that's really cool. It's kind of
that does
the
sound
Airbnb
good.
projects all did that by creating an inthewild.md section or a section in the README or something, but like basically a file in the repo for people to do that. And it was really instructive to see a bunch of people PR themselves in there. Many of the people are, small entities that I'd never heard of, and then some of them are much larger, but it's still useful to see that. I think that's not like, that could be part of the landscape stuff that could be separate, but I do think that has value on its own.
I would definitely agree with that part, and I've actually pushed for that in Node specifically multiple times, and we've made some progress in a few different areas on that.
So on this front, I guess in terms of concerns, is there any blocking concern that we think we couldn't overcome? Like in terms of the accessibility ones, it sounds like there's some path forward. I guess my question is there something that says, no, we just don't want to do this?
I guess I personally have some concerns about the inclusivity of this in terms of us saying this is what JavaScript is, when that is categorically not true. And that's kind of my concern in terms of optics around that. And additionally, tying like certain elements of it, the entire thing just completely doesn't work if you have JavaScript off, which isn't, it's again an accessibility issue. And on top of that, I'm not entirely sure how I would feel about the market cap and funding elements of that tying into something that the dashboard, or that we as a project or we as a foundation are kind of asserting about ourselves.
Sorry, what was the last comment? I don't get that.
So if you look at either of the landscape dashboards, in the first two, or at the top there, it says you're viewing, I'm looking at the GraphQL one, so it says you're viewing 122 cards with a total of however many entries and a market cap of 3.82 trillion and funding of 7.75 billion. And the CNCF one is similar. Specifically, I'm not sure how comfortable I am with that. And again, I'm not a voting member, so y'all can totally ignore this. But I'm not sure how comfortable I am with that, considering, issues around maintainer funding and stuff like that. And basically not being able to connect, you know, that 3.82 trillion with helping people in certain ways.
I see Tierney's point here. I think it would be great to have more of a story for our communities about, you know, how, like supporting them with other kinds of open source, you know, funding and sustainability before we use, especially given, I think there's a sensitivity in our community toward overly capitalist themes, and we can't obviously ignore there's business here and that we need to engage with, and open source is really good for business, and that's a story we should promote. But I think there's a point that I resonate with, that perhaps putting it right there front and center is kind of a little off-putting.
So to start, if that one line wasn't there, is
yeah, if we could just sort of like, maybe that's something that we don't put front and center in the same way that the other groups did. But
well, also like how valuable is market cap really? I mean, like a company of large market cap might completely drop a project in a given month or completely adopt a new one, and separately market caps can fluctuate wildly. Like if you look at the top 5 market caps in the world, they reshuffle constantly. Like I mean, I don't know if that's valuable.
Fair enough. And I mean, given this is all open source, we can certainly ask for it to be changed or submit a pull request to change it ourselves. I mean, these are interface questions, which I think are maybe separate from the principal question. Interface questions can be addressed with an open source project.
Right, but so I guess the issue there is that, like, in terms of interface questions can be addressed with an open source project, this is something that's being brought to the CPC as like a proposal, and it's then on us to go address that, then on the folks bringing it to the CPC, which is more of like, that's adding work to the workload that this group already has, which is a slightly concerning precedent to set to me.
For what it's worth, I agree with Tierney on the, you know, the JavaScript ecosystem is just so vast, and there's a lot of different use cases, a lot of different projects, and I mean, how you can feasibly build something like this that's representative of the entire community is, I don't see that being really possible.
But I don't think it's intended to represent the whole community. It just says this is what's in the foundation.
Right, but
yeah,
the implication there is that this is the landscape, which the messaging would need to change, I think, is a fundamental element there.
Yeah, as a bird's eye view of the projects in the foundation, that seems like a neat thing. But certainly we can't, if we're going to leave stuff out that's not in the org, so then no, we can't say that it's the JavaScript landscape, because it's not.
I don't.
Right, it should be the foundation, the OpenJS Foundation landscape, or.
Well, I think the intent is to open it to all projects who want to contribute.
Okay, so this includes projects which are not part of the foundation, like the GraphQL Foundation?
No, so GraphQL is scoped entirely to people who are using GraphQL. CNCF is scoped to CNCF projects. Other organizations which use, the landscape tool, it's scoped specifically as that. It's not meant to be a survey of the entire ecosystem. And it's not, I mean, if it presents itself that way, then it's presenting itself incorrectly, because that's well beyond the scope of what anybody would volunteer to do. And these are things that do take quite a bit of time and effort to set up. The fact that somebody offered to set it up for us is not a trivial amount of time either. But the same goes for attempting to maintain something that goes beyond the boundaries of the scope of the foundation. That would just be a tremendous lift, which I honestly don't know that anybody would either have the ability, the overall top-down view to be able to see that, or the time to take it on. So I think that necessarily limits this to Foundation activities versus being a landscape of the JavaScript ecosystem.
So we could call it like OpenJS project map, and that would sort of very clearly scope it to here are the projects in the OpenJS Foundation. And that would probably sidestep the concern of we're trying to be a survey of all the things in the ecosystem, which, like you said, is not possible.
I guess I'm a little confused because it sounded like Robin said that it would not be limited to the Foundation
Yeah.
project.
That was my interpretation.
And actually looking at the GraphQL one, like on the check marks, there's like a relation to non-GraphQL Foundation members is a checkbox you can check. So that one clearly is more than just the Foundation.
Well, if the scope is more than just the Foundation, then like at what point, like, I mean, are we thinking that it'll eventually encompass a significant chunk of NPM? Because a lot of things are related to a lot of things if you go down that rabbit hole.
I think it would depend whether somebody wanted to contribute a pull request, you know, to include that. I mean, I guess I wouldn't say let's close down the idea of including information about dependency trees or anything else. You know, the dependency tree is obviously quite deep, but at the same time, if a volunteer shows up and says, I would like to document this and make sure that this is, you know, well represented, this particular dependency tree, then I would be very hard pressed to say we should turn that down.
Well, it seems like
And
that some of the hesitation I'm hearing is around like officialness. In other words, like if this landscape were to exist somewhere, it would be fine and we might find value in it and want to adopt it. But it seems like some of the hesitation is like stamping our name on it. Is there a way we could develop it for a while and take advantage of the free labor being offered, and kind of without putting that stamp on it, and then maybe the folks with hesitations would be okay with that interim period?
I think that would also be a good way to get some feedback from the ecosystem on it of like, hey, what would you want to see this as? Are you okay with it as, you know, this initial envisioning, or would you like to see something different beyond the like relatively small scope of 12 people in this meeting?
Just throwing it out there, if it's made very clear in the title that this is like an unofficial list or that it's the commons, like, and it's not by any means official or you know, a recommendation, does this still have the same concern?
I mean, I think it's, you know, I think Jory's suggestion around like not calling it the landscape, because I think that word is very tied up in a lot of things in JavaScript, that it could not possibly represent if it was like the anything landscape referring to JavaScript, but tying it to something like, you know, the project map, I think that would relatively address some of this. Of like, these are just our projects. I mean, not just our projects, but this is the map of our projects and kind of how we have set this up. I think that could be fine if we want to limit it to our projects.
Yeah, I think once we get beyond our projects, I get nervous for a variety of reasons.
I would love to see that.
I'm sorry. We're like halfway through the meeting already. For the sake of time, should we move to another item?
Yeah, we should. Should we just revisit this again next week?
And I guess we should have continued the discussion in the issue as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything, can we talk to, or just maybe for Brian's sake and for Dan's sake, I think we should say like that this is something that we're interested in and we'd love to move forward and talk about how we can tailor it for our sort of ultimate vision. And that's something we can do like, you know, together over the course of maybe, hey, we could even talk about some of it at Collab Summit. Register now.
Yeah, I mean, the place to ask questions like, can we rename it, is in that issue. Dan's on that issue. He'll be able to answer this. I mean, probably within a few seconds, given how quickly he responds on things. So that would definitely be a good place to ask these questions, particularly related to how do we present the interface.
All right, great. Let's do that, and we'll move on. I agree that this is a very interesting conversation, but we will move on to agenda item number 2 of today's agenda. All right, so moving on, let's take a look at issue number 409, which is GitHub admin. Mateo asks for admin in this org, how are they determined? He was looking at doing some admin tasks and couldn't. There's some commenting here. So I see, Miles, you commented that you've made all voting members and Brian owners of the org. What are people's thoughts? What should we do here?
I think that at least the voting members should be owners.
I'm okay with the regular members being owners as well. I guess the only gotcha there would be like, what kind of like would that affect the process of us approving regular members? And like, additionally to that, is that a bad thing? Not to call anyone out on anything, but Tierney, you made a comment earlier about how you were just a regular member and not a voting member, about making a decision on things. And I really think that we should err on not making that distinction as much, and really empowering all members of the CPC to feel like they are full members who are capable of getting things done. And so, with that said, I could see an argument for both scoping it to private and expanding it further. With myself, maybe selfishly, because I am a regular member, leaning towards regular members having the same privileges in that capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Miles. Both on just the general conversations and decisions and such, but also in terms of GitHub org admin.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could look at it as there like the downside of or additional risk, or is there any reason why not? Is kind of, I guess, where I'm going at.
So one thing, and we can follow up with this afterwards. We do not currently have 2FA enabled for the org, which we can do, although I think there are a couple org members who do not have 2FA enabled, but we may want to only allow those with 2FA to have ownership.
That's fair. That makes sense to me.
I think it would be, I mean, really wise of us and prudent of us to say, we're going to enable 2-factor auth in a couple of weeks, and you need to have that enabled. I'm also really keen for us to be on the same page about like strategy for adding collaborators or team members. So in the interim of having just a real plan here, I think or maybe Joe, I don't know, one of us made teams for voting members and teams for regular members. And then there's also a project leads team. I really like using teams to sort of manage permissions, but I don't know if that's something.
That makes total sense to me. I'm pretty sure in the Node project, that's exactly the way, when you're added to the, collaborator list, it gives you access to the things collaborators have access to. So, because otherwise you've got multiple things, when you add somebody, it's like, go do this, 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 and this. And when you remove somebody, go do this, and things get missed.
For what it's worth, I just took a quick peek at 2FA for the whole org, and it looks like there are, I'm just double checking, only 2 people in the org of 60 something people who do not have 2FA. Now, I cannot say that stays true for the people who have not yet accepted invitations. But I think we could potentially even just enable it and give those 2 people a heads up that they've been removed for not having 2FA, but we'll re-add them as soon as they enable it.
That sounds fair to me.
That's probably a separate issue, but good idea to do.
I don't mind reaching out and doing that, Miles. I think that's just a good hygiene thing for us.
And then I guess just separately from that, I think for repos and stuff, the ownership definitely makes sense to be doing those permissions through Teams. But the admin for the org, as far as I know, is on a per user basis and cannot be assigned via a team.
Right, the org owners, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah. So that one does need to be manual directly to the user's membership.
All right, so what are we agreed that all members should be admins, and we'll request 2FA to be enabled and move forward on that? Is that where we're landing? Sounds reasonable to me.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. Great. If somebody can maybe drop a comment in that issue, we can move forward on that. I would do it, but I'm on my wife's computer and not logged into GitHub. So
We can add it in. Discussion in CPC meeting. What's that? Both. Okay.
Great. Yeah, moving on. So the next agenda item, and just as a time check, we have 5 minutes, is pull request 407. This is changes to code of conduct handling. It's been open for 13 days. This is our friends from the AMP project opened up. We've got a lot of approvals. Emily has a comment resolved, but it's unclear if he's blocking.
Yeah, and the discussion was whether or not we should have basically a copy of the code of conduct in our repo versus just a link.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a new issue opened, which he's proposed adding it, like a PR to add a copy. So I don't know if we could detach that comment, get this piece landed, and then handle the discussion of whether or not we want to have a copy in that other PR, if that makes sense, or what. This one it would be nice because it's blocking not 407, it's blocking moving the COC guidance to stage 3.
Yeah, I agree with you, Michael. If we've already got the one blocking or potentially blocking comment addressed elsewhere, then I think we should move forward on this one.
But I think we'll need probably Emily's agreement to that.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing.
It's either
right,
that
well,
or have a vote, but
yeah, well, let's just reach out to him and try to get this resolved and tidy it up for next time.
yeah, I did add a comment to the issue on that front, so hopefully he'll respond. We can go from there.
Yeah, I can try to ping him on Slack or something too. Great. So with a couple more minutes, we can look at add missing links for bylaws and mission vision statements. Did you already add comments to this, Michael? This is related to your board.
Yep, we basically, I guess I jumped the gun in that we got the board to vote because that was last Friday. From our own governance, it needs one more day to before it meets the requirements. So I was thinking, you know, unless anybody has any objections, as of tomorrow, I'll land it.
Okay, cool. All right, I pinged Emily. He is online too, so maybe he'll drop in. Great. Let's see, what's next on the agenda? Add proposal for charter. Go ahead.
I was wondering if we could go to 383, which is review ComCom charter update.
Okay.
I think based on my understanding of our governance, it's ready to land. We gave the board an FYI. I just thought it would be good to confirm no objections in this meeting, and if not, we can go ahead and land that.
Great, no objections here. Great.
Great.
All right, well,
Thank you all.
do we want?
Yeah, I'm gonna merge it.
If you merge it and then close that issue, sounds good. Thanks.
Yep.
Excellent. Great. Do we, let's see, is there anything else that we want to hit before we drop into private? Nothing's jumping out to me. Poll 379 is waiting on issue 407. The Collab Summit sessions, I should really probably just take the agenda off of that, which I will do right now. Oh, I can't, I'm not logged in, never mind. Some onboarding questions and such. I say we drop into the private session and dig into that and call it a day on the agenda. Anybody object? No?
Yeah,
Great.
sounds good.
All right, cool. So with that, we will, Brian, if you wouldn't mind killing the live stream.